I am just waiting on the old Facebook to fire up here. It's connecting. Morning. All right, here we go. And we are ready to rock and roll here in three, two, one. Blast off. All right, I think we are good to go. We're live and direct. It's Monday, February 27th. The Crypto Flight Path live stream has started for 8:43 a.m. U.S. Eastern. Good morning. I'm Ted. This is Josh. Say hello.
Good morning. Eventful
Morning.
weekend being called a scammer and a crook on Twitter.
Yes, that's victory in and of itself when you
Isn't it?
when you
You know,
irritate the extremist viewpoints. The there's no room for anyone else if it's not my thing. Viewpoints is kind of silly in my opinion. But
well, that's the whole
share with us
point.
some of the experience that you've had.
No, yeah, the whole point is just to engage in conversation and talk about stuff. Like it isn't to get mad. I think people have to, if you find yourself being upset over, somebody else's opinion, you probably should analyze your position. You're probably overexposed to any certain asset, right? Like this stuff isn't a personal extension of yourself. These things are financial tools that you can use to increase your financial freedom and sovereignty, and that's about it. So like you were just saying, we're all entitled to our own opinions, and I have mine, you have yours, and other people might disagree, and that's okay. But the point is that we're able to engage in constructive thought and criticism. I mean, like we say all the time, we're trying to learn. We're trying to help people get in the space, but every day we're learning too. So I'll leave it at that. It's been fun. I've enraged my first Bitcoin maxi, and I'll consider that a win, even though I am a huge Bitcoin guy. For some reason, they don't think we're on the same team. So
Yeah, I just find it all mostly amusing. And I'll tell you the interesting story that uh, hearing you describe your experience is reminds me of a situation where I was excited about Bitcoin's price action in 2020. It was right around June or July. It was after the dip, we'll call it. And I mentioned to a colleague at the time that I was excited about it, and he said something. He wasn't trying to be rude or mean. He was just like, "Okay, great, yeah, you've got $500." He didn't say me. He's like, "Yeah, these people are." You've got $500 worth of Bitcoin, and it goes up a little bit after puking. Like, what has been achieved? Like are you going to retire on this now? And it was just it was really interesting. And I was even though I didn't like what he was saying, it stung a little bit because I was like, you're attacking my precious Bitcoin, and I realized that I was a little bit like not too close, but I was starting to like really understand and get excited about the potential and what I believed it could be, the opportunities that it can unlock and all these other great things. But it was interesting to be reminded that there are other people out there that like are not they're not so far down the rabbit hole that they can't see it in context. And it was just it's funny to me. The point I'm driving toward here is that I've learned that a lot of folks who have the strongest opinions also have the smallest positions in these things. And there's probably an inverse relationship, is that the larger your position in these things, save for like a Michael Saylor who has a very large platform, quote unquote, and has a lot of reach, like the larger the position, the smaller the opinion, or the more quiet people are. And I think where I derived that thought process from is from working at the fund, where we didn't really talk our book. It was a way we didn't really talk about the positions that we had on with outside parties. And I mean, like, we would get visits from brokers trying to sell us on moving to their platform. They had, oh, we have the best technology, we have the most guaranteed liquidity, et cetera, blah blah blah. And they would like tell us about your strategy, and we were like very tight-lipped about it. But we had very large positions in some of these things, and like not necessarily crypto, but like foreign exchange, like non-deliverable forwards, currencies, like buying and selling currency futures and other commodities futures. And anyway, the point I was trying to get to is that it's interesting, and I've observed this as well, where people will tell me, individuals will say, I've got $600 worth of Bitcoin, or I've got $90 worth of Bitcoin. Man, this thing's going to the moon, and I'm going to retire. I'm paraphrasing, but it's just kind of funny. They have these very small positions, but they will talk you till they're blue in the face about that position and what it's going to do, and they're very very opinionated and have very strong conviction, which I respect and enjoy, quite
Well,
frankly.
that's what I think is great about this space too, is it gives people excitement, it gives people hope, and they can, once they have that small position, they continue to learn more and educate themselves, which is what's so powerful about this. And I think coming back to when somebody says something or tweets something that angers you, the reason it angers you is because there's a little bit of truth in what they said. So a
Yep.
lesson that I learned a long time ago was that, if somebody says something to me and I get angry or upset, I need to sit with it and think about why and try to find the truth in what they said. And, I can acknowledge that publicly, or I can sit with it and say to myself, Josh, the reason you're upset by this is XYZ. Maybe you should analyze how you think about this. And that way, next time somebody says the same thing, you're not angry. You understand why you feel the way you do. And, I think that's just something general life advice, right? Like just, if somebody says something that makes you angry, you don't have to attack them. You don't have to go off the wall. Just sit with it, and acknowledge it, acknowledge the truth in what they said, because there's always a little bit, right? It might not be very much, but there's always a little bit. And,
Mm-hmm.
go from there. So I think with all this Bitcoin versus altcoin versus, all this stuff, I think you just have to take it with a grain of salt, do your own research, get comfortable with however you want to play this market, and then go from there. But with Saylor, I really respect and admire Saylor. I mean, he put his money where his mouth is. The guy is, you can't say he's not doing more to bring people into Bitcoin. And I think as far as crypto goes, I think his stance has been essentially, look, I mean, do whatever you want. I'm buying Bitcoin. And like you brought up a great point when we were talking earlier, like, the point of regulation is to allow some of these bigger institutions to come into the space. And I don't think people that are in the altcoin game or business and companies, people are building companies in this stuff. This is the other thing too. People have jobs, there's tax dollars going to the government, there's but these people aren't necessarily against smart considered regulation. Okay, like all of that's okay, but these blanket statements that everything but Bitcoin is security, well, okay, like no, like I don't think that's smart considered regulation. So
Yeah, I agree.
that's
I agree with that. I mean, there are certainly, in my opinion, there are certainly some contingent or some chunk of these uh, other crypto assets that are 100% securities and are currently being misrepresented, which I think the issue is the misrepresentation more than anything else. It's not that they exist, right? I mean, they are or wrong. I don't know if I'm right or wrong there, but that's the way I'm looking at it. And I think that that put it in perspective, there are other assets that I've invested in the past that I wasn't really excited about, like mortgage REITs, but I was interested in them more so not because of what they were, but because of the potential return on the investment and the yield. And there's risk in everything, especially when you're investing. So keep that in mind. And the point I'm trying to drive home is that I didn't find myself looking at these REITs, for example, and saying, you know what, these things are trash because they don't look and act like Bitcoin, for example, because I knew about both. But I still, at the time, was trying to learn and understand why someone would buy a REIT. And there was a lot of good stuff on Seeking Alpha that I read about mortgage REITs, where people talked about strategically the why, and the how was simple. Put some risk capital to work in these particular financial instruments because they generate stable, steady income. And I thought, okay, if I'm 60 years old and I have, let's say $50,000 is one unit of my risk or one unit of my capital that I'm willing to put at risk in order to generate some sort of return in the market, is 4.7% return on my money a good bet? Maybe. Is it safer to put it in a savings account and earn 0.1% at the time. Maybe that's a better idea. Maybe it's not though, because I mean, at that point, if you need income, then you're looking for income or productive assets. And there are opportunities, or the thing I'm trying to get really like hone in on more than anything is that you don't have to like the thing yourself. There may be a market for things that you don't like, and I think there are a market for other types of cryptos. Other, to use the language of the Maxis, there's Bitcoin and then everything else. Okay, well, guess what? There's a lot of people around the world that are into everything else, and will find some utility, and they have just as much right to exist and be seen to follow the law and treat people fairly. And if they end up not doing that, then the market will react. They'll either, their token will go to zero, or they'll get arrested and be prosecuted or something like that. And the system is designed to go after people like that. But to circle back around and really just touch on the point again, is that declaring everything else a security without doing any further diligence seems a bit hasty. And it's more for, in my opinion, it's more for sound bites and for the just the things to populate the media apparatus to blast us with, and it's 100%, in my opinion, it's going to be flavor of the week until the next thing comes along. How many of listening and watching this later on remember ordinals and the big stink that caused, and how there was a blip on the radar and right back down, and who cares?
Well, that's well said. I think you're spot on. I mean, I agree. I
So,
agree.
all right, now, so today, let me just give you the rundown of what we're going to cover. So, this next segment we'll call 5-minute macro. Moving forward, I'll touch a little bit on a very interesting piece by a quantitative analysis firm called Capriol Investments. They're based in Australia, I believe. We'll take a look at there's always bad news, perhaps, but there's some really interesting good things that are going on in, from a macroeconomic perspective. These folks have really good stuff. We'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about the dollar index, dollar strength, but also talk about how a world where the dollar can be strong and used and useful to others all around the world, and how Bitcoin can follow along or perhaps lead that dollar strength because of the way the two can work together, to the dismay of many of the maximalist types who think that the dollar can't coexist. I'll argue that if you think that the dollar is going to go away, then you need to go back to school and look and understand about how many people around the globe, but today on 27 Feb 2023, still rely on the dollar because it is a lifeline, and without it they would be doomed. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll get into the Ethereum Shanghai update, and then Hong Kong is coming online. And then we'll fade into the sunset. We're talking a little bit about like the next 6 to 12 months, where we think things are going based on the things that we understand, and we'll maybe hypothesize and postulate and consider what is coming down the pipe in broad terms. So with that, I'll kick us over to the Capriol Investments. These folks, it's capriol.com. They have a newsletter. This is the newsletter, the most recent newsletter from Feb 1. I read this from beginning to end, and I found it really interesting. So I think it's worth reading. I'll put the link in the chat as we're talking a little bit about here. But really, the section that I wanted to unpack is the section called the headlines. And most of the time, the headlines are, some really, really bad thing happened here. Here's why you should be afraid. Here's some other really, really bad thing. And the reality is that bad news is good news, meaning people like it. It's just human nature. We tend to gravitate towards the things that make us feel something, and usually the bad things, they call it the bad and the ugly here, which I think is very apt. But anyway, you shouldn't be surprised, or even like many of these things that are in the bad section here, we've already been inundated with, like the FTX things going on with Genesis, and some other thing. What's interesting about the Capriol piece here is that they're located in Australia, and as I was pontificating about earlier, I find this interesting in the U.S. in our lives here, meaning in business mostly, where our org having to do significant amounts of business overseas, and having to, well, a lot of American companies do this, yes, but I'm just saying that we as individuals don't really get to peek behind the macro curtain and talk and really understand why someone would take US dollars, convert them to Australian dollars or New Zealand dollars or Japanese yen for the purpose of transacting and doing business in other parts of the world. And where I'm going with this is that the perspective of people outside the United States or that work in these other environments, that are subject to the policy decisions that policymakers like the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government make these decisions that affect others around the world. And it's good to see like what others are talking about. But what I'm really, really like trying to guide us all back toward here now is that they point out some good things that are happening. I'm just going to walk this list real quick. Josh, if there's anything that you want to add before I do that, please feel free.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to always remember that, you're always going to see the bad headlines, and the key to understanding and being successful in crypto is to filter out a lot of what we'll call noise, and stuff and look, crypto had a terrible year last year. There's no sugarcoating it. What we had a Lehman, Enron, and then a Madoff all happening in the same year, right? And so not good, right? Like there's I can't make that look good. But the important thing to remember is, despite all of that, those weren't necessarily crypto or Bitcoin problems. Those were company problems. Those were people problems. And despite all that, the industry continues to move on. DeFi is still working. Bitcoin's still producing blocks. So, what we really try to do is, while we understand and recognize the bad things that have happened, we really try to focus on, okay, where can we be wrong? Okay, this is bad stuff, but is my thesis still true? Does it still hold correct, right? Despite all of this. And so when you look at some of this good stuff, you're going, okay, yeah, we had a really bad year. Yeah, it's all over the headlines, but what's actually going on in the space? Are people continuing to invest in, the infrastructure of Bitcoin and crypto? And the answer, I think, is yes.
Yeah, I agree. And what I'll do here is you can, first of all, I understand that anyone watching is quite capable of reading the bullet points. So I'm going to do my best to not just repeat back the bullet points, but I'll try and summarize is that we have a good piece of news on nuclear power being used to mine Bitcoin, which I think is very interesting. There's been a lot of FUD in the world around nuclear. It goes all the way back to the Fukushima incident in Japan. And then you roll that forward to the political landscape in Europe, especially Germany, shutting down nuclear plants because of the perceived risk. And what's pure politics, in my opinion, because, oh my gosh, they're on the tail end of that madness. Then you have the Russian madness with the the optics of doing business with Russia to buy natural gas so people can heat their homes because they can't get good, reliable, stable electricity from nuclear power plants that are all over the place in Europe. Now, take that with a grain of salt. I don't know how many are or are not there, but the point is that there's some good news around nuclear power, but also around Bitcoin mining and pushing back in the face of all of the environmental FUD around Bitcoin. And all I have to say, last thing on environmental FUD, is that if people really cared about the environment and were really concerned about electricity consumption, then fast forward to near the end of this year, when people Thanksgiving Day, like clockwork, like Pavlov dog, they immediately start putting up all their Christmas lights and they start consuming orders of magnitude more electricity to light some strings of light outside their home overnight when no one's looking at them. Then take a look in the mirror. You're part of the problem if you think Bitcoin mining is somehow as wasteful as that, or somehow more wasteful than that, or if all of these video game enthusiasts start adding up all of the electricity that they're consuming globally and look at it in relation to the amount of electricity that Bitcoin mining consumes, then you're part of the problem. and you clearly haven't done your research, and you're really, in my opinion, this is a very strong opinion, by the way. I think you're not interested in impacting the environment. You're more interested in having a good, strong emotional reaction where your adrenaline gets pumping, and that's then you need to reevaluate life, in my opinion. But we'll move on because opinion
No,
doesn't
no, no.
really matter.
That's well said, Ted. I mean, and I think that's too. No, and look, I think a lot of people shy away from opinions. Like that's your opinion. I tend to agree with it, right? And not everybody will, and that's okay. But to another point, like, okay, if you really feel like using electricity is bad for the environment, stop using your dryer. Like,
Or
and
your air conditioner.
well, yeah, and the other thing too is if you look at human energy consumption over the past couple hundred years, we should be striving to use more energy because that moves human beings forward. And this idea that we shouldn't use energy is a control mechanism.
Oh
Okay, like
yes.
that. That's what it is. There's no way around it. And so, back to the article, nuclear power is an amazing. It's not the right word. Energy, right? We have the technology to do this, and this technology has only gotten better over the last 30 or 40 years. It's more safe. It's just to your point, I think people really need to take a step back and kind of reevaluate again. If something we're saying angers you, like take a second and figure out why it does, and then analyze it, and then come to a conclusion. Okay, maybe Josh and Ted are right, or maybe they're wrong, but maybe I should also take another look at this. And when it comes to Bitcoin, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin mining is that miners are instructive or incentivized to find the cheapest, most renewable power source they can, because that makes them more profitable. And in doing so, that leads to energy production in ways that might not have been thought about before. And I think that's a knock-on effect that doesn't get mentioned enough, right? Like I think Bitcoin mining will produce a quote unquote green energy revolution, right? And that's something that, you know, we all talk about and all want, but it's got to be combined with burning fossil fuels so human beings can live for the next 50 to 100 years, right? There's nothing about that that's not true, right? So, I think your point is well taken, and I don't think you should back away from it, right? Like, I think that's something that we should be very strong about. And then people can disagree if they want to, but I think it's
Yep.
a great point.
I'll disagree. I saw a great meme that said someone was typing up an article about how energy consumption was off the chart. Bitcoin was gonna fill the sky with black smoke, and they were using their $2,500 laptop. They were drinking their $8 coffee with the like air conditioner running inside a big city with all of the heat that was emanating from all of the asphalt and all of the steel, and it was exactly the right thing to illustrate the pure hypocrisy of people doing nothing more than virtue signaling. And that really was the point, is that there's always going to be the virtue signaling types that they're going through that phase in life, and they're, hey man, nothing I can do to stop them personally, other than to just know that it's ridiculous, in my opinion. But anyway, I want to get back to the five. It's more than 5 minute macro at this point. But anyway, the other things that are coming down the pipe. There's Blockstream raised some money. This is also on the mining topic. Good points that you made, Josh, about the incentivization around like the cleaner, more renewable, more cost-effective energy sources. This will drive the innovation necessary to get to the point where we rely perhaps less on hydrocarbons and more on renewables, but the technology has to advance to the point where it outpaces hydrocarbons, because until then, hydrocarbons are the most stable and reliable. The sun doesn't shine on every part of the earth 24 hours a day. The weather affects wind, and I mean that's just real life. Let's face it. But anyway, let's move on. There's also across Europe, which is notorious, a lot of FUD in like from a crypto regulation and legislation and operational standpoint. There's been a lot of FUD in Europe, but looks like that the French are doing some good work around trying to make it easier to meet the regulation. Same with the Swiss. They're starting to do something very interesting around tokenizing their own shares. If you don't know what that means, just hop on the old Google and educate yourself a little bit and like go down that rabbit hole about like this idea of tokenization of things like shares of stock. That's really there's potential value there. Won't bore us with the details. On the FTX front, it looks like some recovery efforts are yielding fruit, which is great. Uh, this the all of the nonsense around FTX and scam bankster fraud, to your point earlier about these really awful events, these were driven by people making bad decisions. And the irony, I guess, or it's somewhat unfortunate, is that people will project their dismay and their anger about this onto crypto. But I think that's just, it's human nature. One, two, it sometimes that has to happen for people so that this is just my opinion because I've been through phases where I was I was frustrated with, like, for example, mortgage REITs, but then missed out on opportunities because I couldn't look past something else. And hey, that's just real life. And the opportunity, perhaps there's an opportunity for someone else in these moments to normally wouldn't have participated in these markets to get in. So, but I think the good news here is around the recovery efforts and the fact that some people, maybe not all, are going to be made whole or somewhat whole, and hopefully the sole time, which is important, is understanding counterparty risk. So I think that's good stuff going on there. As far as like the last few bits and pieces here, this concept of proof of reserves is some people have opinions on whether or not it's like legitimate or not, but the idea is that there are counterparties like this exchange called OKX are taking action to try and mend the perception and create an air, a somewhat air, an air, a more like a better air, like a more clear air of safety around being able to demonstrate and provide verification that they're able to operate and that they're being fiscally responsible and they're operationally going to be around, so people are willing to get in the game.
Yeah, and on
Another,
that,
yeah, go ahead.
um,
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, note real quick, when you see proof of reserves, that's half the equation. When you look at a company that's saying they have proof of reserves, what you also have to say is, okay, that's great. You have proof of reserve. Now show me your liabilities, because you need the liability piece to determine if the company is viable or not. So it's great these companies are doing proof of reserves, but you know, if they're going to be fully transparent, they need to show their liabilities too, because you can't figure out if a company is economically viable, financially viable, unless you know their liabilities.
Agree, and this is I think well put. It's one part of it's one piece of the puzzle to create the whole picture. So baby steps perhaps, and until and what I'm I guess one of the underlying thought here is that this catalytic event with FTX and all these other terrible things have catalyzed this movement now, and companies, because they're for-profit enterprises and they need to stay viable in the market, are going to figure out ways to innovate around doing these things so that they can stay in business. The other thing I wanted to point out here is the National Australia Bank. Interesting that a national bank is investigating and looking into, instead of shunning the idea of a stablecoin and calling stablecoins a threat to their existence as a business or as a nation, like the nation of Australia, for example. They're embracing. To me, this is embracing the tech and looking at it, how we can integrate this into the financial system nationally, and what opportunity it might create. It's certainly not going to replace the Aussie dollar. I think it shows promise in my opinion, and I think that it's interesting that it's happening outside the U.S. But maybe I just don't understand the political landscape domestically to the point where I can understand why we aren't as a country trying to lead the rest of the world here, as to some politicians would say. We must maintain our dominance and our leadership posture, blah blah blah. But that's talking heads. And then last but not least, some other fundraising activities going on. I mean, 500 million is nothing to sneeze at. So there's still investment or venture capital still flowing into projects despite the gnarly year that we had. So thankfully, that's ideally behind us for now until the next major thing that goes on. Who knows what's in the pipe? And then last but not least, there'd been a bunch of FUD around Binance and whether or not they were going to go out of business and that they're doomed, et cetera. Again, we got to look at the bigger picture here is that if they operate globally, and I'll argue that if they're really are going to increase their headcount, and that means that they see that I mean they're going to make a capital investment in their own business to be able to support the demand that they see, and I think that's a really interesting thing to think about is that the path forward here is like there's opportunity and things there's a lot of good things that can come out of continued adoption the rate of adoption of people getting interested in crypto assets and trying to figure out how they can participate but also benefit and be better off as a result around the world, not just here in the US.
Yeah, and I think with all this, what you have to do as a normal person trying to understand all this is ask yourself if all these companies in all these different countries are analyzing these assets and investments and continuing to put capital in and continuing to raise money, why are they doing that? Right. Well, the reason they're doing that is because they see a future in it. Right. And so
Yep.
it's just further evidence and ammunition for somebody who's bullish on crypto and bullish on Bitcoin to say, okay, look, my thesis is still right, despite everything that happened last year and despite all the negative news right now. And when you say FUD, you mean fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? And that's
Bingo.
people perpetrating to the market because it gets clicks, and there's a lot of people that use it to try to drive prices down and all that stuff. But the goal is to kind of ignore as much of that as you can and focus on what's actually happening. So that's what we try to give you a little glimpse of here.
Yeah, so in summary, despite all of the nastiness that tends to pervade and prevail, there's still a lot of interesting and good, quote unquote, good things happening. And with that, we'll transition over to the next topic. We'll talk a little bit about want to like peek under the hood and look at the dollar index because there's an interesting topic, or we can get into this topic, and I'll bring up the dollar index chart. This is a daily time frame, but there are a couple things that we'll unpack here, and really this idea that the U.S. dollar is something that has to be quote unquote weak in order for things like crypto assets and Bitcoin, for example, to be strong, and then vice versa. If the dollar is stronger, or let's say in relation to other currencies like the euro, the yen, the Great British Pound, Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar, and then a basket of many others, or a grouping of many other global, like other currencies from other countries around the world, that somehow that the dollar's strength in relation to those, which implies that the dollar is in either more demand based on its strength or in less demand based on its weakness or the perceived weakness of it, that somehow the dollar, and it's really hard for certain trying to like get into like exactly what people are thinking, but if you like the perception, at least from my perspective, is that there's this very strong idea that the dollar has to go down for Bitcoin to go up. And I think that there's probably there's some things about that aren't really entirely true. So the idea here is that I'll back out on a time frame a little bit here so we can look that the U.S. dollar goes through cycles where relative to other other currencies around the world, the U.S. dollar is worth more at certain times. And if you go back all the way to 2001, you can see that for three or four years, the U.S. dollar was very, very strong. And notice that this is 2000. This is the dot-com bust when people were getting out of stocks and other risk assets like mainly stocks at that time because crypto didn't exist. But the point was that they were selling things that they perceived were going to be less valuable in the near term, and they were getting their dollars back. both domestically here in the US and then around the world. And that's where this dollar strength, this would be a strong dollar over here. And then fast forward to like just before the financial crisis in 2008, the dollar was considered, you would say that this is a much weaker dollar here, and it is gyrated back and forth, and then we see, interestingly enough, that since 2014, dollar's been kind of an uptrend, and you can, if you're interested in understanding like how other currencies are behaving versus the dollar, that's a good place to start to look at like what the exchange rate is for the euro or the British pound, for example, over time versus the dollar. And where I'm going with this is to try and help people understand that the reason that the dollar is strong at various times globally is because mainly because of the fact that when people in other countries, their currency, like they may be in a country where their currency continues to be devalued, and the dollar, they take their local currency and they trade it for dollars because they're doing a lot of business in US dollars. A lot of business around the world, believe it or not, transacts in US dollars. And so the demand for US dollars is tends to be outside the United States. We don't really think about this very much. Or I mean inside the United States, but outside the US, people tend to prefer to transact in dollars. And like there are a lot of places, like for example in Africa, where the local currency is just like you can't survive on it. So people will do anything they can to take anytime they get paid in their local currency, they will exchange it for U.S. dollars because it's considered a lifeline. So anyway, I want to pause for a second, Josh, and have you like help me like guide this discussion around the dollar here a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's a lot of things that go into this. And I mean, this is kind of a high level topic, right? And there's a lot of, I mean, you could go, people spend hours analyzing and debating like, why the dollar has strength versus other currencies, and why that, what the Fed is doing and what the Treasury is doing to either increase or decrease the strength of the dollar, blah, blah, blah. Like what it really matters for is that people investing in crypto need to pay attention to this, need to learn what it is. Like you said earlier, the prevailing thought is in order for Bitcoin to succeed, the dollar needs to go down, right? So the price of Bitcoin only can go up if the dollar goes down. What we're kind of articulating and still forming a thought process around, quite frankly, is there a world where the dollar rises in strength and Bitcoin also rises in price as well, right? And that's something that, Michael Saylor's talked about. That's something that, other people that are much smarter than us have kind of pointed at and articulated. So from our perspective at Crypto Flight Path, we just want to make people aware that this is a factor you have to consider in your entire thought process of Bitcoin and crypto, right? Because, crypto really likes liquidity, and, the actions of Federal Reserve banks around the world affect, the amount of liquidity in the system. They affect, the strength of the dollar. All those things can affect the price of Bitcoin or crypto at any point in time. But the long-term trend is still the same, irrespective of, what the dollar is doing, in my opinion. And I've reserved the full right to walk that back 1,000%, because quite honestly, I'm still learning as I go too here.
Yeah, I want to the one of the most important things that I experienced was listening to Michael Saylor talk about something that I kind of understood but wasn't really clear on, is the idea that Bitcoin, because of the way Bitcoin is, the way, like Bitcoin exists as a global monetary network. Okay, so it's money is information. It's a global network of physical computers, mining rigs, etc. That as long as you're on the public internet, you can access it. So that concept is something that is relatively new in the information age, is that that money can flow or value can flow across a network of computers that's secured by all the things that secure the Bitcoin network. We don't have to get into that part, but here the important concept is that This monetary network is a mechanism for transmitting value to participants around the world 24 hours a day. And what what can be transmitted is, or the concept that he outlines is that the Bitcoin network is a rail, and using his words, the rail by which US dollars can reach more people around the world than they already have. Not just the fact that or not just because the US dollar is considered the world's reserve currency, that's a whole nother topic, but the idea that people in areas where, like remote areas, for example, there are parts of Africa today where there's not good infrastructure. There's no running water and there's barely electricity, but someone puts up a cell phone tower, and then people with very inexpensive cell phones that can send text. There's mechanisms today where it creates economic opportunity where someone can purchase area and then sell it for US dollars and be able to transact business in an area with US dollars where there's no bank and there's no other infrastructure, where otherwise people wouldn't be able to transact or facilitate business, where people can sell goods, buy goods, and get the things they need, like clean water, food, livestock, other like building materials, so they can improve their quality of life, have plumbing, electric, run the infrastructure out and things like that. The point I'm trying to get to is that the Bitcoin network can actually facilitate the distribution of the US dollar even further around the globe. And I think that's what Michael Saylor has tried to articulate, is in this concept of Bitcoin being a rail that, think of it as like a rail network for like like trains travel on rails, for example. The point is that the Bitcoin the network, the Bitcoin network, creates the opportunity for dollars to flow. People take dollars here, convert them to Bitcoin, and then they get converted back to US dollars in some other part of the world. And that implies that there would be increased demand for US dollars in aggregate. And I think that's a really powerful concept that I didn't necessarily come up with initially, but having listened to it be articulated in such a way, I've been able to formulate my own continuously developing understanding of what that means. So I think that's a really interesting concept.
You kind of cut out there on the end. I think too, it's not just dollars, right? I think the issue that the point is you can transfer any fiat currency over the Bitcoin network, payment rails. So you could send pesos over the Bitcoin Lightning rail. You can send dollars, and it's just an aspect of the technology that's interesting. And I don't think many people are fully awake to that. But very important again, from our context, like just to be aware of it, just to understand it, and we'll talk more about the dollar and its effect, and we can watch in real time, how the rising or falling dollar affects the price of Bitcoin. And, we'll be able to see, over time, if we get a scenario where you get a rising Bitcoin price along a rising dollar. So that'll just be interesting to see how it plays out.
I agree. So we'll let the sun set on the dollar index chat, and then we'll transition over to another interesting topic, which is the Ethereum Shanghai, what's it called? The unlock event, or the
Shanghai, the Shanghai upgrade.
Upgrade, that's it.
Yeah,
So,
essentially, the thing here is that's going to happen is, we talked about this before. Right now, when you're staking Ethereum, you have to lock it up, right? And you can't unlock it, right? And so with the Shanghai upgrade, people that own Ethereum will be able to stake and unstake their Ethereum at will. And when you stake a cryptocurrency like Ethereum, you get a return, right? So the return on Ethereum, staked Ethereum, might be 4, 5, 6%. Don't know exactly what it'll be yet, but the reason people do that is because they can earn a yield on their investment. And so right now, if you want to do that, you have to lock it up indefinitely. After the Shanghai upgrade, you'll be able to send Ethereum to a stake and then pull it out at any point you want. I think what that'll do is, unlock a lot of value, basically because right now people aren't willing to stake their Ethereum. They don't want to lock it up. They aren't sure if they're going to be able to unlock it after the upgrade. I think you'll see more people start to stake Ethereum. And I think more importantly, crypto is narrative driven. Okay. And so a lot of times some of these, big bull markets are driven by certain narratives. And what you might see here, why it's important to pay attention to this stuff, even if you're a Bitcoiner and you don't like, any other cryptocurrencies, is this could be a scenario where the Shanghai upgrade goes through successfully. It could kick off maybe a Bitcoin summer or Bitcoin spring. I don't know for sure that that'll happen, but a lot of times these events are kind of the catalyst for money entering the space.
No, I agree with that was really well put. Is the narrative here is that this could be very good, but I think the interesting or the one of the like proof in the pudding elements here is that, or not proof in the pudding, but this idea that one of the things that has held up or gotten in the way of people that are willing to take Ethereum, for example, and stake it is that if once you do that, you can't take it back out, and that is just a flat out deal breaker for a statistically significant number of participants, in my opinion. Because I know that I wouldn't. I mean, that was the thing that is literally the thing that's kept me from participating, is because
No,
I wasn't. You know what I mean?
same here. Same
Yeah.
here.
So what does this mean? What does this mean potentially? And there's some bits on the screen that I'll articulate. One is just with the upgrade being able to facilitate the ability to stake and unstake, gives people the ability to have the control that they would not have once they were to stake beforehand. So with this article talks about that it's this idea that this could be very bullish, and but I think Josh, you articulated well, is that this creates the condition where more people will participate in staking. It's very unlikely that people will immediately after the upgrade, that all the people that had staked then yank all of their Ethereum off they unstake it, for example, and that no one goes near it. I don't see that as like likely at all. Is what
No,
I'm
I don't.
trying
I
to
don't think
argue.
the probability of that's very high. Now, it is a probability, right? And so what you have to think there is, okay, all these people that have staked Ethereum, when they entered into the staking agreement, they knew they couldn't get it out. So these people are long-term bulls on Ethereum. Okay, let's just think about this logically. They knew what they were getting into. They were okay with not being able to pull it out. They understood the fact that this is going to be a long-term investment. Now, all of a sudden, when they can unstake it, they're going to say, "Oh, I no longer believe in Ethereum. I'm going to pull all my money out and sell it on the open market. It's a piece of trash." Right? I don't think that makes sense. Right? I don't
No.
think I don't think it does. Now, the market could shock us, and who the hell knows? But I think in broader context, and that can lead us to our next kind of statement and kind of help us wrap this up, is how do we look at this market over the next 6 to 12 months? So you have the Shanghai update, which is coming in March, and then June 1st, in my understanding, that Hong Kong comes online, and you're going to have money coming in from, uh, what do you call it? Eastern money from the East that
Yes.
and this is a really big deal. Again, this is another potential narrative driven, uh, kind of event that could kick off a run in crypto prices because you've got Shanghai update and you in combination with Hong Kong coming in line, money coming into the system that was previously not able to enter. I think this is potentially very, very positive for the space. If we can get some sort of measured response from the U.S. government, which I'm not very hopeful for. I think that they're in a position to where they can just kind of say a bunch of stuff and then disappear for a few months and then come out a few months later, say a bunch of more stuff, and then never really do anything. I think that's kind of where we're at. But what's nice for crypto is it's a global globally driven asset class. So if the US wants to sit on its hands or be ultra aggressive, crypto can move on without it. And I think that's very unfortunate if that's what happens. But if that's what happens, so be it. We've got to adapt and move forward. Uh, I think that when you look out the next 6 to 12 months, you also have to consider where we are at in the Bitcoin halving cycle. I know there's a lot of people that don't buy into that. But again, my position is where it's a 4-year cycle till it's not. Okay. And we can talk about left translated cycles versus right translated cycles, something we have to pay attention to as we move forward. But historically, where we're at right now is, 2023 should be a year that has some up, some down. Like it's going to go up and down, right? But a year overall of consolidation building into 2024 and 2025, when you really see these parabolic runs that happen every 4 years centered around the halving. But having said that, I can see a scenario where you get the Shanghai update, a Hong Kong coming online in June, the US government might come out and actually be reasonable. And then you have all the conditions for this thing to go nuts. Okay. So, but that being said, just stuff that we watch, this is stuff that we use to kind of guide where we're going. I don't know that like I make any specific investment decisions based off any of these things in particular. If I can stake some Ethereum, I might do that. It might help us with trading a little bit. If the market momentum shifts and goes bullish, you can use that. Or if something happens and it goes negative, you can have that. But long term, the process for me anyway is still the same: is to accumulate Bitcoin and other crypto assets that I see that will have value. And ultimately, when you get a parabolic run or the asset performs well enough for you to exit, then you exit the cryptos into USD to do whatever you want with, right?
Yeah. Two things of note here that you pointed out, and thanks for sharing that the thought process there and like the potential paths that we're on. But the two things that are important here is that this is a regulatory. It says regulatory requirements are open through March 31st, and this licensing thing takes effect on the 1st of June 2023. Okay, that's this year, very soon. Okay, in broad terms, the thing that's going on right now is that until that happens, that you have to ban, quote unquote, ban people from Hong Kong based on their IP address. So what happens when this goes into effect is that the ability for people to log on, make accounts at exchanges, and actually participate becomes legal and possible. And people have the ability to do this without using IP address obfuscating software, which is just fancy words for VPN. And it lets people get involved legally, and they don't have to worry about being involved. They can just get involved, and that's what we're talking about here. Like lowering the barrier to entry, reducing the friction, and that is ideally not a prediction, but it's ideally going to be good for the market. And I think this confluence of events, as you well articulated, set us up for potential for the rest of the year. So, what else do we have? Is there anything else here?
No,
Anyway, there's. I think we hit on the major points for the Shanghai upgrade and what that means. So I think we're in good shape there.
yeah, and I think just how to look at this stuff too is like, again, back to the original thing we were talking about, your original article that you shared, that when you're investing, crypto is so weird. It's 24/7. It's a global asset. There's a lot of different interests involved. You can't control any of that. We can't control what the government's going to do. We can't control, what the Hong Kong government's going to do. All we can do is form a thesis around what we believe is going to happen, and then look for information to either validate or invalidate that thesis, and then make a decision based off the information. And if new information comes, you have to be willing to say, okay, I was wrong. That's okay. Like, being wrong doesn't make you an idiot or a bad person. It just means that you formed a thesis and it turned out not to be true. That's okay. You learned, and it'll help your next thesis evolve. So a lot of this investing too, and something that I want to articulate too as we move forward to people, is that you're gonna lose money investing in these assets when you first start, right? And it's just part of the game. Okay. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. What you have to do, though, to stay alive is to limit yourself and to limit the losses that you take. So don't look at something like ETH upgrade and say, I'm going to put all of my life savings into, Ethereum because people can stake it now. That's a terrible idea. You don't know what's going to happen. We can pontificate on the idea that it will be good for it, but we don't know. Something could go wrong in the update. Some other event could happen. So when you're doing this and analyzing this stuff, you have to take measured risk and limit your losses because you're going to have investments that go wrong. It's just part of the game. But if you want to play this game, you have to be able to protect yourself against bad losses. And part of doing that is recognizing that you are going to have investments that don't go right. So just a full disclosure, don't take anything that we say as financial advice. Obviously, like you guys know that, you're smart people, but
Yes.
the thing is to, when you look at this stuff, take your time, don't there's always going to be a market, there's always going to be a way to make money. There's always going to be a new opportunity, especially in crypto. So don't feel like you have to jump in all at once. Don't feel like you're going to miss anything. Uh, you'll be all right. This is a long-term game, and it's going to be around for a while, in my opinion. So
Yeah,
that's
I agree. That was well said. I appreciate you. Just as you can see on the screen, not just to be a fancy disclaimer, but it's really more just to remind anyone and everyone that you really need to take some time and do your own research and try and think about how you can stay in the game. And I'll say it again, understand things like counterparty risk. And what I'm hopeful is going to happen this year is that more and more uh, uh, more and more enterprises globally are going to get their proverbial stuff together, and they're going to play by the rules. They're going to rebuild and re-earn trust of participants around the world, and use use these past catalytic events as a springboard into the future where uh, people have the necessary protections and also make educated decisions, and they protect themselves when participating in these things. And with that, we can wrap it
yeah.
up.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think from our perspective too, we're Bitcoiners at heart. We believe in the opportunities that some of these crypto assets are making. I think they're producing life-changing both, technologies, apps, and opportunities for people. That being said, we don't condone scams, despite what Bitcoin maxis say. We don't want scams. We don't want people to lose money. We're in favor of smart, thought out regulation that protects people and investors from bad doers that enter the space. And by the way, there's bad doers in every space. Okay. So, crypto gets a lot of grief because there are participants that are unethical. And as ethical participants in the market, we want to do everything we can to help people stay away from those and learn what they are and how to identify them. And sometimes you're just not going to be able to. Okay. Like FTX, the smartest people in the room were all in on FTX for the most part. There was guys that were unbelievably sharp that lost their entire funds because they took the counterparty risk of leaving them all on FTX. Okay. So you're not going to be able to pick out every fraud, but that's okay. Like the way you prevent that is measuring your counterparty risk, like I said earlier, and making sure that you protect your downside. And I just want to add that again because I think it's really important,
Yeah.
because to win at this game, you have to be able to stay alive. And if you can stay alive, you don't have to be 100% right on everything. You just have to be in the game long enough for the market to realize its full potential, which we think is much, much higher from here. And we're not alone in that process. There's all kinds of people. We'll give you references on the website that you can research for yourself. But that's kind of my last point that I wanted to make, and I'll leave it there.
Excellent point. Let's wrap it up for today, the 27th of February. This has been the Crypto Flight Path. I'm